Having just graduated from college with a degree in business, I found myself back in my childhood home. My name is Lucinda, I'm 22, and honestly, I hadn't planned on moving back in with my parents, but here I was. Coming home was a strange experience. Everything looked familiar, yet it all felt foreign, as though the house had stayed the same while I had become someone entirely different. Fortunately, the job search didn't take long. Within a week, I landed a position at Davidson Marketing. It was an entry-level analyst role, not the most ambitious job, but it offered a decent salary and promising performance bonuses. That evening, over dinner, which featured Mom's famous meatloaf, I shared the good news. My parents smiled and nodded, but there was a cautious look in their eyes. I told them I only planned to stay for 3 months, save up some money, and then get my own place. The clinking of forks on plates suddenly stopped. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, the kind that always preceded a serious conversation. Mom carefully set her fork down, folding her hands in front of her as if preparing for a long speech. "Lucinda, you know I can only work part-time at the library because of my back problems," she began with a sheepish smile. Dad cleared his throat and added, "And things aren't great at the factory right now. There's talk of layoffs. We could really use your help with the bills." Mom nodded. "You could stay a little longer. You wouldn't have to pay rent here. It makes sense, doesn't it?" I stared at the uneaten piece of meatloaf on my plate, feeling trapped. Their arguments sounded reasonable, and after all, they were my parents. Wasn't it my duty to help them? Taking a deep breath, I nodded. "I guess I could stay a little longer," I said hesitantly. Life settled into a routine. In the mornings, I went to work. In the evenings, I came home and helped pay the bills. Mom always cooked dinner, and Dad occasionally stopped by my room to chat about random things. Everything seemed calm on the surface, but I felt a growing unease inside. Last week, something changed. My older sister Sarah visited with her husband Mike and their kids, Emma and Lucas. The moment they walked through the door, my parents seemed transformed. Mom beamed as she scooped up 4-year-old Emma, while Dad hoisted Lucas onto his shoulders. "Oh, my precious angels." Mom gushed with laughter. "Sarah, darling, you look wonderful. How are you? How's your garden? What's new with your book club?" Standing in the kitchen doorway, I watched as my parents hung on Sarah's every word, peppering her with questions about even the smallest details of her life. Mom fussed over the kids, while Dad regaled Lucas with tales of his first bike. Everything seemed perfect for them. "Lucinda, would you be a dear and make some coffee?" Mom said, not looking at me as she bounced Lucas on her knee. Silently, I walked to the coffee maker, feeling invisible. Sarah had always been the star of our family's show. I was the supporting cast. I thought back to when I was 11, sitting at this very kitchen table, showing Mom my report card. She had glanced at it briefly before brushing it aside. "That's nice, Lucinda." "Sarah, darling, which colleges are you considering?" Every childhood memory burned like a fresh wound. My parents had always been proud of Sarah, her achievements, her perfect life. And me. I was just Lucinda. Sitting in the kitchen, listening to the laughter coming from the living room, I realized I didn't want to play this role anymore. I sat there, quietly chewing my peas, while Mom and Dad hung on Sarah's every word about her advanced placement courses, college tours, and the delicate balancing act of academics and social life. Sarah had a way of speaking that captivated her audience. I, on the other hand, remained silent. It felt as though my voice wasn't needed in this house. When Sarah went off to college, things changed even more. I was 11, and I still remember that dinner like a scene from an old movie. Mom had been crying tears of joy. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," she kept repeating, wiping her eyes. "We'll make this work, won't we, Robert?" she said, turning to Dad. Of course we will, he nodded firmly. We'll take out a student loan. Our Sarah deserves the best education possible. A week after she left, they sat me down at that same kitchen table, but their tone was very different. Lucinda, we're going to have to tighten our belts, Dad said, drumming his fingers on the tabletop. The loan payments and Sarah's college expenses are significant. From that moment on, everything really did change. While my classmates showed off their shiny new phones, I held onto my old flip phone until it literally fell apart. When I needed new clothes, we went to thrift stores, and Christmas presents became practical items like socks or school supplies. But I never heard my parents complain. They always found the money for Sarah. Mom would write checks with an impassive expression, saying, "We can't let her worry about money." By the time I was 15, I had learned that lesson well. I joined every school club, participated in every competition I could, and spent my evenings buried in textbooks until late into the night. The grades that were once just good became perfect. I wrote essays for scholarship competitions until my hands cramped, knowing that was the only way I could avoid debt. Those efforts paid off. I earned a full scholarship to the state university. I remember how my parents' usually composed faces lit up with relief when I announced that they wouldn't have to spend a single cent on my education. By then, Sarah had already graduated, found a job in Brighton, and soon married Mike, her college sweetheart. 2 years later, Emma was born, followed by Lucas. My parents were ecstatic. Their perfect daughter had created the perfect family. Every visit from them became predictable down to the smallest detail. Sarah would arrive with Mike and the kids, and, as usual, I found myself relegated to the role of a free babysitter. "Lucinda, you'll watch Emma and Lucas while Mike and I go shopping," Sarah would say casually, not bothering to ask. "We just really need some time to ourselves." The first few times, I tried to push back, hinting that our parents could help. But Mom would always rub her back and gently reply, "Sweetheart, you know it's hard for me to chase after little kids." Dad would just shrug and add, "I need my weekends to rest." And so, I was left alone once again with 4-year-old Emma, who played Frozen for the 100th time, and 1.5-year-old Lucas, who was determined to decorate my room's walls with a red marker. Sarah and Mike enjoyed lunch with friends, while my parents strolled through the garden, occasionally peeking in to check if I needed anything. "Everything all right in here?" Mom would ask, peeking into the room with a cheerful smile, as if they were doing me a favor by leaving the kids in my care. I tried to convince myself that it was just one weekend a month. "Just one day where you're doing your duty as a sister," I repeated to myself as Emma laughed and Lucas waved my notebooks around like flags. But as soon as they left, exhaustion would hit me like a wave. All this time, I had been trying to be a good daughter, a caring sister, and an indispensable aunt, but sometimes it felt like I was slowly dissolving into these roles, losing my sense of self. A year passed in a monotonous rhythm of babysitting and paying bills. I'd almost grown used to the constant tension when a phone call changed everything. I was washing the dishes after dinner when I heard Mom's phone ring in the kitchen. Her usually calm voice suddenly wavered. "Sarah, sweetheart, don't cry. Tell me what happened." Through the receiver, I could hear sobbing, so loud I caught every word. Between gasps, Sarah explained that Mike's company had suddenly gone bankrupt. They no longer had any income or savings and couldn't afford their rent. Can we stay with you for a while?" she finally choked out. "Of course you can, darling," Mom exclaimed without a moment's hesitation. "We'll make room for you." My chest tightened. I stepped closer, drying my hands on a towel. If they're moving in," I began cautiously, "maybe this is the right time for me to get my own apartment?" I knew how my words would sound, but I said them anyway. The reaction was immediate. Mom looked at me as if I had just suggested throwing Sarah's family out on the street. "Lucinda, don't be ridiculous. There's plenty of room for everyone. We're family, and family sticks together in tough times, Dad said firmly. The next weekend turned into chaos. Sarah and Mike arrived with 3 cars packed full of their belongings. The house suddenly felt cramped and noisy. On Saturday morning, I packed up my things and moved into what used to be the storage room. The tiny space barely fit a narrow bed and an old dresser. My old, spacious bedroom was now turned into a playroom for Emma and Lucas. The kids need more space to play, Mom said, as though the decision was self-evident. 5-year-old Emma and 3-year-old Lucas immediately declared the house their playground. They raced through the hallways, laughing, screaming, and fighting loudly. Sarah watched TV at full volume or spent hours on the phone, complaining to her friends about how hard the move had been. Emma, Lucas, calm down. I shouted as they barged into my room for the umpteenth time, scattering my work papers everywhere. They're just playing, Lucinda. Don't be such a grouch, Sarah retorted, not even glancing up from her phone. After work, all I wanted was peace, to read a book or watch something on my laptop. Instead, I fell asleep to the sound of Baby Shark playing on repeat and the pounding of little feet chasing each other down the hallways. Occasionally, this noise was interrupted by Sarah's loud laughter at her favorite TV show. Mike insisted he was looking for a job, but most of the time, he was sitting at the kitchen table, glued to his phone. The job market is tough right now, he would say every time someone asked. But I'm sure something will come up soon. At night, I lay in my tiny room, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had let my life turn into this. But every time I thought about bringing up the idea of moving out again, I remembered Mom's disapproving look and Dad's firm tone. "We're family," echoed in my head, silencing me. When the first utility bill arrived after Sarah's family moved in, it felt like a punch to the gut. The amount was twice as high as usual. I stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of how so much electricity could be used in 1 month. "The kids like to leave the lights on everywhere," Sarah commented nonchalantly when I showed her the bill. "But you'll manage, right? You're always so responsible." Responsible. The word sounded like a compliment, but it only made me feel worse. Every new line on the bills, every little thing I tried to fix, was a painful reminder of how trapped I was in this endless family debt. The noise outside my door never stopped. Emma and Lucas were yelling at each other again, and Sarah's laughter boomed through the walls. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying not to lose my temper. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the figures on the bills that made my chest tighten. The amounts were nearly double what they had been before. Electricity, heating, water, everything had skyrocketed. Each bill seemed to whisper, "Your dreams of getting your own apartment are nothing but dreams now." I glanced at my phone screen, where the balance of my bank account blinked back at me. The sight of it was the final blow. Almost my entire paycheck was going toward maintaining this chaos. At dinner, I finally decided to speak up. Slowly pushing peas around my plate with a fork, I exhaled. "The utility bills have doubled. I can't keep covering them by myself anymore. It's eating up almost my entire salary." Sarah's fork clattered loudly against her plate. She looked up at me, her face full of indignation. "Are you seriously complaining about money right now? When Mike and I have lost everything?" Her voice trembled with anger. "I'm not complaining," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I'm just saying we need to find a way to split the expenses." "You're unbelievably selfish," Sarah cut me off, her voice rising. "We're going through the hardest time of our lives, and all you care about is money." Mom, who had been eating in silence until now, spoke up. "Sarah's right, Lucinda. Family helps family, that's what we do." "Yeah, this isn't the time to be counting pennies," Dad added firmly, nodding as if he had just closed the argument. I stared down at my plate, trying to swallow the bitter lump of words that wanted to escape. Fine, I said shortly. Never mind. A week later, Mike got a job at an insurance company. The salary was lower than his previous job, but at least it was a step forward. I thought maybe things would start to improve. But I was wrong. It's so hard being alone with the kids all day, Sarah complained just a few days later. Mike leaves early in the morning and doesn't come back until dinner. I never get a break. At first, it started with small requests. Lucinda, could you watch the kids while I run to the store? Lucinda, can you keep an eye on them while I take a shower? But slowly, those small favors began to snowball. I'd come home from work to find Sarah dressed and ready to leave. Oh, good, you're home, she'd say, grabbing her purse. Mike and I are going out to dinner with some friends. Emma and Lucas already had a snack, but they'll need a proper dinner in about an hour. We'll be back by 10. I nodded silently, feeling something inside me crack. Every weekend turned into my personal nightmare. Sarah and Mike casually announced their plans, movie nights, lunches, meetups with friends, and left me with the kids. Meanwhile, my parents would suddenly remember distant relatives they needed to visit and conveniently disappear for the entire day. I spent my Saturdays chasing after the kids, picking up toys, cooking simple meals like mac and cheese, and trying to stop Lucas from having yet another meltdown over a wrongly cut sandwich. Emma would draw on the walls, and I did my best to distract her. By Sunday evening, I was completely drained. The house looked like a battlefield, but I still had to cook dinner for the whole family. After one particularly exhausting weekend, I felt like I couldn't stay silent anymore. During dinner, I put down my fork and, trying to keep my tone even, said, "We need to talk." All eyes turned to me. I looked around the table, gathering my courage. I'm really tired. This situation with babysitting isn't working for me. Sarah's head snapped up. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Are you saying you don't want to spend time with your nieces and nephews? Her voice was sharp with accusation. Mom frowned, and Dad tensed as if bracing for a storm. I took a slow breath, feeling my face flush. I was about to voice something that had been building up inside me for a long time, but their reactions felt like walls closing in, ready to crush me before I could finish. Mom reached out and gently patted Sarah's hand as if soothing a child. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she said with a smile full of false reassurance. "This is actually good practice for Lucinda. She needs to know how to handle children for when she becomes a mother herself. One day, she'll look back on this as training." I clenched my teeth, barely stopping myself from saying anything in return. Everything I had said during dinner felt meaningless. They quickly shifted back to their usual conversation. Sarah talked about her day, describing how hard it was for her, slipping in a few details about Mike. Mom and Dad listened to her as if a member of the royal family were sitting at the table. Mike nodded occasionally, agreeing with her every word, while I sat in silence, pushing the remnants of food around my plate. After that conversation, nothing changed. To be honest, it got worse. It felt like Sarah and Mike saw my attempt to speak up as a challenge. Now they found even more reasons to leave the house. Often, I didn't even have time to take off my coat after work before they were standing at the door with car keys in hand. "We're going to that new restaurant downtown," Sarah announced as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The kids already had a snack. "Thanks, Lucinda." Weekends became pure torture. Waking up on Saturday mornings, I knew the next 2 days would be a whirlwind of children's cartoons, Emma and Lucas's fights, screaming, requests, and tantrums. I would drag myself out of bed with a heavy heart, bracing for another marathon. But everything changed that Wednesday. I was sitting at my desk at work, trying to focus on analyzing data for a marketing report. The exhaustion weighed on me like a physical burden. At that moment, Rachel, my coworker and probably the only friend I had, popped her head into my cubicle. "Hey, want to do something fun this weekend?" she asked, perching on the edge of my desk. I looked up, managing a weak smile. "Depends on what you're suggesting." "A bunch of us are going to Pine Ridge Ski Resort," she said enthusiastically. "We're leaving Saturday morning and coming back Sunday evening. The slopes should be perfect right now." For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of joy flicker inside me. A genuine sense of anticipation. On Friday night, I was packing my duffel bag, humming quietly to myself. In my tiny bedroom, sweaters, gloves, and ski pants were scattered everywhere. I was already imagining the snow-covered slopes, the crisp winter air, and the serene silence broken only by the sound of skis gliding over the snow. That's when Sarah appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "What are you doing?" she asked, eyeing me and my half-packed bag. "Packing for a trip," I replied calmly. "Where are you going?" Her tone turned cautious. "To a ski resort with friends from work," I explained, turning back to my packing. Her face darkened. "You need to cancel that trip," she said, crossing her arms tighter. I froze and looked at her in surprise. "Why would I do that?" "Because," she said as though it were the most obvious thing in the world, "Mike and I are going to Aunt Linda's 60th birthday in Millbrook. Mom and Dad are going too. You need to stay with Emma and Lucas." I barely managed to hold back laughter, but in the end, I couldn't stop myself and let out a laugh. Sarah flushed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You're joking, right?" I asked, continuing to fold my clothes. "You seriously think I'm going to cancel my plans just because you couldn't be bothered to give me any notice?" "This isn't funny, Lucinda," she snapped. "You're being unreasonable." I took a deep breath, trying not to raise my voice. "No, what's unreasonable is how you all assume I should drop everything to be your babysitter." Sarah's face turned crimson. Her eyes burned with anger, but she didn't have a response. Mumbling something under her breath, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the room. I heard her loud voice echoing down the hallway. "Mom! Dad! Mike! You won't believe what Lucinda's doing." I kept packing my bag, feeling the anger pulse in my temples. The entire house seemed to shake with the thud of footsteps, and my tiny room suddenly felt even smaller as Sarah, Mike, and my parents all piled in. Mom, as usual, looked at me with that disappointed expression I knew far too well. "You're going skiing?" she asked coldly, her hands planted firmly on her hips. "That's exactly what it sounds like," I replied, zipping up my bag. "I'm going to Pine Ridge with friends for the weekend." "But you can't," Sarah interjected, her voice rising to a near shriek. "We have Aunt Linda's birthday party." "No," I said calmly, standing up straight. "You have Aunt Linda's birthday party. I am going skiing." A tense silence filled the room. I turned to look at them, feeling something stir inside me, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time, anger mixed with resolve. "And why am I only now hearing about this party?" I asked, locking eyes with Mom. "Why didn't anyone bother to ask me or even let me know?" Mom dropped her gaze, looking uncharacteristically embarrassed for the first time. Sarah, however, lifted her chin and spoke in a tone dripping with condescension. "We discussed it and decided this was the best arrangement. We're going to the party, and you're staying with the kids. It's logical." "You discussed it?" I repeated slowly, feeling something snap inside me. "Without me? And decided for me how I would spend my weekend? How convenient." "Well, you can't bring kids to an elegant party," Sarah said, exasperated. "Aunt Linda specifically said no children." I hoisted my bag onto my shoulder. "That sounds like your problem." "They're your kids, Sarah. Figure it out." Mike frowned and finally spoke up. What's that supposed to mean? I looked at him calmly, though inside the storm still raged. It means exactly what I said. I have plans, and I'm not canceling them. Your kids are your responsibility, not mine. If you can't take them with you, then either stay home or hire a babysitter. Sarah let out a shrill gasp, as if I had just struck her. A babysitter? With what money, exactly? I shrugged, meeting her glare head-on. Not my problem. I turned to face all of them, feeling an unfamiliar but welcome sense of confidence growing within me. My voice came out steady and firm. Let me make this clear. Tomorrow, I'm leaving to go skiing. I will no longer be your free, on-demand babysitter. I'm not sacrificing my weekends, my plans, or, frankly, my life for your convenience. If you need help with the kids, hire someone. But I'm done. The room went silent. Sarah stood there, opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water. Mom looked as though she'd been slapped. Dad seemed to be trying to hide in the doorway, as if hoping to become invisible. And Mike wore the same bewildered expression that had become his default since his company went bankrupt. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, though it was only a few seconds. Finally, Sarah's face twisted, and she burst into theatrical sobs, covering her face with her hands. This is just so unfair, she wailed through her fingers. Mike muttered something under his breath that sounded like ungrateful, but I ignored him. Mom sighed, straightening up and fixing me with a cold, furious glare. How could you, Lucinda? Her voice was quiet but filled with reproach. After everything we've done for you? For a moment, her words made my heart clench, but I quickly reminded myself that they had never cared about what I wanted or what was important to me. All you've done is pile responsibilities on me that I never asked for, I replied, looking her straight in the eye. With that, my patience ran out. I walked past all of them toward the door, my steps firm, feeling the air behind me hum with their silent shock and indignation. You're being completely irresponsible, Lucinda. Dad thundered, shaking his head. Utterly selfish. I stood in the doorway of my room, my duffel bag still slung over my shoulder, facing my family, who now resembled a Greek chorus of accusations. Selfish, ungrateful, inconsiderate, immature, their voices rang out one after the other, as if those words were meant to crush me into the floor. I listened silently, but the real blow came when Mom spoke. Her voice trembled with both anger and disappointment as she delivered her ultimatum. If you walk out that door tomorrow, don't bother coming back to this house. To their surprise, I laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh that burst out, cutting through all the pain and resentment I'd bottled up for months. They stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. You know what's funny? I asked, wiping tears of laughter from my eyes. I've been dreaming of leaving this place for months. But I couldn't find the courage to do it. And you know what? You've just given me the perfect excuse. So, thank you. Get out. Sarah screeched, her voice trembling with fake sobs. Just leave already. Gladly, I shot back, pulling my phone out of my pocket. I quickly dialed Rachel's number, switching to speaker so everyone in the room could hear the conversation. Hey, Rachel, sorry to call so late, I began, keeping my tone as even as I could. Is that offer to stay at your place still open? Not just after the ski trip, but maybe for a few days? Rachel's voice filled the room with cheerful energy. Of course. I've got a spare room. Come over anytime. Perfect, I replied. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Ending the call, I immediately started packing whatever I could carry. Clothes, documents, personal belongings, all of it was tossed into boxes and bags. I raced up and down the stairs with the urgency of someone catching a train that wouldn't wait. Sarah, Mike, Mom, and Dad stood silently in doorways, as if unable to believe I was actually doing it. When the last box was loaded into my car, I turned to face them in the living room. "Oh, one more thing," I said calmly, feeling an odd sense of lightness as I spoke. "Since I'm no longer living here, I won't be paying for utilities or groceries anymore. That's your responsibility now." Mom's face turned pale. "Lucinda, don't be ridiculous," she began. "That's not my problem," I repeated, the phrase feeling like a newfound mantra. Ignoring their outraged protests, I turned and walked out of the house. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I climbed into the car. The drive to Rachel's place blurred in my mind, overwhelmed by a sense of relief. My phone buzzed endlessly with calls and messages. Sarah sent furious tirades, Mom's texts were filled with guilt-laden pleas, and Dad sent a few curt but still biting remarks. I ignored all of them. The next morning, Rachel and I left for the Pine Ridge Resort. For the first time in months, I felt free. We skied, laughed, and drank hot chocolate by the fireplace. I savored every moment of that weekend. I didn't have to think about someone else's kids, endless bills, or the crushing guilt that had hung over me for so long. I felt like something inside me was healing, as if I was slowly becoming myself again. When we returned from the resort on Sunday evening, the first thing I did was open my laptop and start searching for apartments. Without the burden of supporting my family, my paycheck suddenly seemed far more substantial. I spent the evening browsing listings, looking for something modest but cozy. By midweek, I found the perfect place, a small but bright one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, just 15 minutes from my office. It was the perfect start to a new chapter. My first week in the new apartment felt like a breath of fresh air. I woke up to complete silence. No loud kids screaming, no TV blaring from the early morning, no Mom's reproachful sighs, or Sarah's endless demands. I could make coffee and actually drink it while it was still hot, not cold and forgotten at the bottom of a mug. In the evenings, I read books, watched movies, or simply sat on the balcony, enjoying the peace. But the messages kept coming. I didn't answer the calls, but I saw their contents. They followed a predictable cycle. Mom wrote, "How could you abandon your family? We need you." Sarah chimed in, "You're so selfish." The kids keep asking where Aunt Lucinda is. Dad added, "Your mother is very upset. You need to fix this." The messages ranged from guilt-tripping to outright accusations. I didn't respond to a single one, and my silence seemed to infuriate them even more. They weren't used to not having control over me. A week later, on a Saturday evening, I was sitting on my new couch, a mug of hot tea in my hands. My phone rang again, and Mom's name flashed on the screen. I sighed, debating whether I should answer. Finally, I decided it was time to set things straight. "Lucinda," Mom began sharply, "I can't believe you ruined our entire weekend. Aunt Linda's party was completely disrupted because of your selfish behavior. Sarah and Mike couldn't even attend because you refused to watch the kids." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar tension start to creep in, trying to squeeze me like a vice. But this time, I refused to let it take hold. "Mom," I interrupted her, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm done." "Done with what?" Her voice wavered with indignation. "Done with being a servant in my own home," I continued, not letting her cut me off. "Done with everyone expecting me to sacrifice my time, my money, my life for everyone else's convenience. I'm done being the family ATM and the free babysitter you can boss around." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mom spoke again, her tone had shifted. It was now that whining, scolding voice I'd known since childhood. "Sweetheart, I know things weren't perfect, but we're family. We need your help. The bills this month, we can't manage without your support. No, Mom, I said firmly. I'm done. Maybe one day, we can build a normal relationship. One that's equal. Without manipulation, without guilt trips. Without you treating me like a resource instead of a person. But for now, I need space. I need to live my life. I heard her sharply inhale, but I didn't let her interrupt. Goodbye, Mom. I pressed the end call button and, without hesitation, blocked her number. Then I blocked Dad's, Sarah's, and even Mike's. In the next moment, I logged into my social media accounts and removed them all from my friends list. It was scary, but at the same time, it was liberating. It felt like cutting the anchor chains that had held me in place for years. For the first time, I felt weightless. Maybe someday I'll be ready to let them back into my life. Maybe, with time and distance, we'll be able to build something new, something built on respect and boundaries. Or maybe not. But I knew one thing for sure, would never again sacrifice my happiness and well-being for their endless demands. I took a deep breath, looked around at my cozy, peaceful new home, and smiled. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was living for myself.